As the days turned into weeks, the rhythm of life in the apartment began to settle into something comfortable. Armand and Sarah were no longer strangers sharing space. They had become quiet companions of each other's lives. Yet, despite this growing familiarity, both maintained the boundaries that had been carefully established at the beginning. They had not crossed into emotional closeness openly, but the small moments between them began to matter more than either would admit. Armand noticed it first in the mornings. He would wake to the sound of Sarah quietly moving around the kitchen, preparing her breakfast with precision. At first, he ignored it, thinking it was simply background noise, something natural. But slowly, he began to anticipate it, finding comfort in the small. Familiar sounds, the clinking of dishes, the gentle hum she made while moving, the soft creak of her shoes on the floor. It reminded him that he was not entirely alone in the world. And for someone who had long preferred solitude, that was an unfamiliar but welcome feeling. Sarah, too, had begun to notice the subtle patterns in Armand's behavior. She observed how he drank his tea exactly 2 minutes after pouring it, how he carefully arranged the newspaper before reading it, how he often paused by the window to watch the world outside before starting his day. These small details, seemingly insignificant to anyone else, became a kind of private language between them. Without speaking, they both understood the rhythms of the other's life. One evening, as Armand returned from work, he found Sarah in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a book in her hands. She looked up and smiled, a simple gesture, but one that seemed warmer than usual. "How was your day?" she asked quietly. "Normal," Armand replied, setting his bag down. He hesitated for a moment, then added, "Better now, I guess." Sarah's smile widened slightly, and she returned to her book, but Armand felt a strange sense of relief. It was comforting to have someone notice the small shifts in his mood. Someone who didn't need explanations but understood anyway. As the days passed, small shared activities began to emerge. They cooked meals together not because it was necessary, but because it became enjoyable. Armand, who had always preferred to eat alone and quickly, found himself lingering longer at the table, savoring the simple pleasure of conversation and shared effort. Sarah, patient and gentle, guided him through new recipes and encouraged small experiments in cooking. They laughed at minor mistakes, teased each other lightly, and celebrated little successes. Even in silence, their companionship was deepening. Watching Sarah fold laundry or water the plants, Armand found himself appreciating her presence in ways he had never imagined. It was not the dramatic or sudden kind of connection one reads about in stories. It was quiet, ordinary, and entirely human. The intimacy was not physical, it was in noticing, in understanding, in sharing the unspoken details of everyday life. One day, Armand returned from work to find Sarah waiting for him at the door. She held a small cup of tea and without a word handed it to him. He accepted it, and they both stood there, sipping in silence. It was not a moment of romance, yet it felt intimate. The gesture spoke of care, of attentiveness, of the subtle ways one person could touch another's life without grand declarations. Evenings became their favorite time. After dinner, they would sit together in the living room, sometimes reading, sometimes listening to music, sometimes just watching the city lights through the window. The apartment felt warmer, fuller, alive in a way it had never been when Armand lived alone. Sarah's presence had softened the edges of his solitude, and though he did not say it, he found himself looking forward to these moments more than anything else in the day. Armand also began to notice how he had started anticipating Sarah's needs without thinking. If she looked tired, he would quietly offer a cup of tea. If she had a long day, he would leave a blanket on the couch for her to relax. He was not doing it consciously. He simply found himself acting out of care, an unfamiliar but pleasant feeling. And Sarah noticed too. She would look at him briefly, a small smile tugging at her lips, as if acknowledging the silent connection growing between them. It was not just routines that brought them closer. It was the little ways they began to understand each other's emotions. Armand, usually reserved, found himself opening up in subtle ways. He would share small thoughts about his day, his plans, or even something that had annoyed him, without fear of judgment. Sarah listened attentively, responding with understanding and quiet encouragement. She never pressured him to speak more than he was ready, and this patience allowed him to relax in ways he hadn't in years. There were also moments of humor that bridged the quiet distance between them. Armin, who had never considered himself particularly funny, found himself laughing at Sarah's subtle jokes, her playful teasing, and the small absurdities of daily life. She, in turn, enjoyed seeing him smile, enjoying the rare glimpses of lightness in a man who had often appeared serious and reserved. These shared laughs became a secret thread between them, binding their lives together without words or declarations. Yet the growing intimacy was not without its complications. Both were aware, on some level, that what they were experiencing was more than simple companionship. Armin sometimes felt a flicker of something stronger, affection, care, perhaps even the beginnings of attachment. Sarah, too, noticed the way her thoughts lingered on him after he had left the room, the small ways she tried to make his life easier or more comfortable, but neither spoke of it openly, afraid of disrupting the balance they had built. One rainy evening, as the soft patter of rain tapped against the windows, Armand found himself sharing a small secret about his childhood. It was not a dramatic story, but it was personal, something he had rarely told anyone. Sarah listened quietly, nodding occasionally, her expression calm and understanding. When he finished, she didn't say much, but she reached out to place a hand lightly on his shoulder, a gesture so simple, yet so profoundly comforting. In that instant, Armin realized that trust had begun to grow between them. He felt seen, understood, and safe in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. From that day, their interactions began to shift subtly. The way they moved around the apartment, the way they shared small spaces. Even the silence between them took on a new dimension. Every shared glance, every gentle smile, every quiet act of care began to carry meaning beyond the practical. They were learning each other's rhythms, emotions, and unspoken needs, forming a connection that was quiet, steady, and entirely human. Armin also started noticing the little things that made Sarah happy, the way her eyes lit up when she found something she liked at the store, the gentle hum she made while cooking, the way she lingered by the window, watching the city at dusk. These observations made him feel more attentive, more present. He began to understand that intimacy was not about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was in noticing, appreciating, and sharing the ordinary details of life. Sarah, in turn, felt the same way. She saw how Armin's care was subtle but constant, the way he adjusted the room temperature when she seemed cold, how he quietly tidied up after her without comment, how he left her favorite tea on the counter in the mornings. These small acts spoke volumes. She realized that living together was becoming more than just convenience or arrangement. It was becoming a shared life built on mutual respect, understanding, and quiet attentiveness. By the end of the second month, Armand and Sarah had settled into a new rhythm. Their days were filled with ordinary tasks, shared meals, quiet evenings, and small acts of kindness. Yet, beneath the surface, something profound was taking root. What began as a simple companionship, mutual convenience and shared space, was slowly transforming into an emotional closeness neither had anticipated. It was subtle, quiet, and gentle, but it was undeniable. The apartment, once a space of solitude for Armand, had become a place of connection. He no longer felt the same loneliness that had defined his life for so long. Sarah's presence had softened the edges of his world, making ordinary moments meaningful. They didn't need to speak of it aloud. The shared understanding, the quiet attentiveness, and the small gestures of care said more than words ever could. Even in their silence, a bond was forming, a bond built on respect, understanding, and the gentle intimacy of everyday life. It was not dramatic, it was not forced, and it was not defined by words. It was simply there, quietly growing, transforming the mundane into moments of warmth, comfort, and shared humanity. And in this ordinary, everyday closeness, both Armin and Sarah began to feel something neither of them had expected. That living together could bring not just companionship, but a connection that touched the heart in ways that were profound, simple, and entirely real. Time passed, and what had begun as a careful arrangement between Armand and Sarah slowly started to change. Their routines had become familiar, predictable, and comforting. But now something more delicate was unfolding beneath the surface. What was once just shared space and polite companionship was beginning to develop into something deeper, a connection neither of them had anticipated. Yet both could feel quietly growing. Armand, who had always been reserved and careful with his emotions, found himself noticing Sarah in ways he hadn't noticed anyone before. He observed how she moved through the apartment, how she handled small tasks with care, and how she laughed softly at things he might have overlooked. Even the smallest actions she took seemed to matter to him now. He realized that he looked forward to her presence, not because it was required, but because it made his life feel fuller. Sarah, for her part, had grown more comfortable in the apartment. She no longer felt like an outsider or a guest. She understood Armand's habits, respected his need for quiet, and had learned the rhythm of his daily life. She also noticed small changes in him. He was smiling more often, lingering longer over meals, and even starting conversations he used to avoid. She could sense that he was opening up in small, quiet ways, letting her into his world little by little. One evening, the shift became more noticeable. Armand had a particularly stressful day at work. Tasks had piled up, a few unexpected problems had arisen, and he returned home feeling drained. Sarah was already in the kitchen, preparing tea as she often did in the evenings. She noticed the tension in his shoulders, the tiredness in his eyes, and without a word, handed him a cup. The simple act of care struck him deeply. He realized how much he valued her presence, not just as a companion, but as someone who genuinely understood and cared for him. He sat down at the table, sipping his tea quietly. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, in a voice he rarely used, Armand began to share a little about his day. Not a long story, not an emotional outburst, but small details he would normally have kept to himself. Sarah listened attentively, nodding and occasionally asking gentle questions. She didn't try to fix anything or offer advice. She simply allowed him to express himself, providing a calm and steady presence. Armand felt an unexpected relief. He realized that he had begun to trust her, and to feel safe with her in a way he had not felt with anyone for a long time. Over the next few days, more moments like this occurred. Armand found himself seeking Sarah's opinion on minor matters, asking for her help with tasks he would normally have done alone, and even looking for her company in quiet evenings. Sarah, in turn, found that she enjoyed being a part of his life, not just in a functional sense, but in an emotional sense. She noticed the subtle ways he began to care for her in return, adjusting the lighting when she seemed tired, and making sure her comfort was always considered. It was during one rainy evening that the real breakthrough happened. The rain tapped gently against the windows as they sat together in the living room. Armand had been unusually quiet, staring at the floor as if lost in thought. Sarah, sensing something, reached over and lightly touched his hand. The contact was brief, casual, and innocent, but it sent a shiver through him. He looked up, surprised, and found her eyes meeting his. In that moment, something shifted. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said softly, her voice steady but gentle. "No," Armand replied after a pause, his voice low. "It's okay." The simplicity of the exchange, the quiet understanding between them, made Armand realize that he was no longer just seeing Sarah as a companion. He saw her as someone who mattered, someone whose presence was essential to his sense of calm and happiness. For the first time, he admitted silently to himself that he cared about her, not just as a person sharing his apartment, but as someone who had begun to touch his heart in subtle, profound ways. In the following weeks, their emotional connection grew stronger. They began to share small personal stories from their pasts. Armand spoke cautiously at first, revealing childhood memories, experiences from school, moments that had shaped who he was. Sarah listened without judgment, offering empathy and gentle encouragement. In response, she began to share some of her own stories, her own fears and hopes, in a way that allowed Armand to see her not just as a companion, but as a person with depth, complexity, and heart they also started to share more ordinary moments in new ways. Breakfast became a time of quiet conversation rather than hurried routine. Cooking together was no longer just about preparing meals. It was a way to connect, to laugh, and to enjoy each other's company. Even chores around the apartment became opportunities to share small jokes or light teasing. Each day, the apartment felt warmer, fuller, and more alive. Armin began noticing how small gestures could carry meaning. When Sarah left a cup on the table, he would wash it and place it neatly where she could easily find it. When she seemed tired, he would quietly prepare a blanket for her on the couch. These actions were not performed with expectation or obligation. They were natural extensions of his growing care for her. Sarah noticed too, appreciating the subtle ways he showed attention and concern. Despite the growing closeness, neither wanted to force words to describe what was happening. There was an unspoken understanding, a quiet intimacy that didn't need labels. Every shared glance, every gentle smile, every small act of care built a bridge between their hearts. They were learning to understand each other's needs without asking, to sense each other's moods, and to offer comfort without explanation. There were also moments of vulnerability that brought them even closer. One night, Armin admitted to feeling anxious about a difficult decision he had to make at work. He rarely shared his fears with anyone, but Sarah's calm presence encouraged him to speak. She listened attentively, offering reassurance without judgment. The comfort he felt in her presence made him realize how much he valued having someone who could understand without needing to control or solve every problem. For Sarah, these moments were equally important. She felt trusted, appreciated, and needed in ways that went beyond simple companionship. She realized that living with Armand was no longer just a practical arrangement. It had become a partnership of sorts, built on mutual care, respect, and emotional support. They were forming a bond that was quiet, steady, and deeply human. Even everyday routines became shared experiences. Morning coffee, reading on the couch, watering plants, or simply sitting together in silence, they all carried a sense of connection. Armin had started noticing things he had never paid attention to before. The way Sarah's laughter brightened the room. The small ways she showed thoughtfulness in her daily actions. And the calm confidence she brought to ordinary moments. Each observation deepened his appreciation and care for her. One afternoon, as they both sat quietly reading in the living room, Sarah looked up and caught Armand staring at her. He quickly looked away, embarrassed, but the moment lingered in the air. There was a sense of unspoken recognition between them, realization that what had begun as practical companionship was becoming much more than that. Their emotional walls, carefully built over the years, were slowly starting to crack, allowing a deeper connection to emerge. It was not sudden or dramatic. There were no grand confessions or romantic gestures. It was subtle, slow, and organic, a series of small moments, shared smiles, quiet conversations, and simple acts of care that gradually built a strong foundation of trust and closeness. They were learning that intimacy did not always have to be loud or obvious. It could grow quietly, steadily, and naturally through everyday life. By the end of this phase, Armand and Sarah had become emotionally attuned to each other in ways neither had expected. They understood each other's moods, anticipated each other's needs, and found comfort in shared silence. The apartment, once a place of solitude for Armand, had become a space of warmth, connection, and emotional safety. Sarah's presence had softened the edges of his world, and his growing attentiveness had made her feel seen and valued. Living together had transformed them both. What had started as a practical arrangement to people sharing space had quietly evolved into a profound emotional bond. It was not yet romantic, nor was it defined by words, but it was real, meaningful, and undeniable. And both of them could feel it, even if neither dared to say it aloud, in these weeks. Armand realized that vulnerability was not weakness, and Sarah understood that patience and understanding could nurture a bond stronger than many people find in a lifetime. Together, they were learning that intimacy could be simple, quiet, and built from the ordinary moments of life. Every day brought small gestures, unspoken emotions, and shared experiences that slowly wove their hearts together. And so, As the days continued, the walls between them began to crumble. Emotional closeness replaced distant civility. Subtle care replaced polite gestures, and a quiet, profound connection grew in its place. Living together was no longer just about companionship. It had become something more meaningful, something real, something that neither Armand nor Sarah could have predicted when they first shared the apartment. Life in the apartment had grown into a quiet rhythm, comfortable and familiar, but also charged with a subtle, unspoken tension. Armand and Sarah were no longer merely companions. They had become integral to each other's daily lives. Every smile and every small act of care seemed to carry more meaning than before. Yet, neither had voiced the thoughts and feelings growing steadily in their hearts. It was a delicate balance, one that both cherished yet feared to disturb. Armand noticed how his thoughts often lingered on Sarah, even when she wasn't around. He caught himself planning his day around small interactions with her, anticipating her moods and silently worrying about her well-being. He didn't fully understand it at first. He had always valued solitude and independence, yet here he was, feeling a strange and unfamiliar desire to be close to someone, to protect and care for them beyond ordinary courtesy. Sarah felt it too. She noticed the small ways Armand had started adjusting his habits to accommodate her. He would quietly make her favorite tea in the morning, leave a blanket on the couch when she seemed tired, and even start small conversations to check on her day. These gestures, subtle as they were, made her feel seen, appreciated, and valued. God. Yet she also felt a gentle hesitation. If she admitted how she felt, would it disrupt the delicate balance they had maintained for so long? The tension became more noticeable in ordinary moments. One evening, as they both sat in the living room reading, Armand reached for the remote to adjust the music. Their hands brushed lightly, and a strange warmth spread through him. He quickly pulled back, pretending nothing had happened, but he could feel the flutter in his chest. Sarah's eyes met his for a brief moment, and she smiled softly, a smile that seemed to acknowledge what neither dared to say. The moment passed, but it lingered in both their minds. A reminder that the line between companionship and something deeper had begun to blur. Even simple routines became charged with meaning. Breakfasts were no longer just about eating. They became small opportunities to share space, exchange smiles, and notice each other's presence. Cooking together, which had once been casual, now felt intimate. They laughed more easily, lingered longer in conversation, and found themselves occasionally stealing glances that spoke volumes without words. Every shared moment carried a new depth, gentle intensity that neither had anticipated. Despite the growing closeness, both were cautious. Armand worried that acknowledging his feelings might change the safe environment they had built. He feared that any expression of emotion could disrupt the rhythm of their lives. That honesty might lead to discomfort, misunderstanding, or rejection. Sarah, equally aware of the change in their bond, struggled with the same hesitation. She valued the connection they had, but she feared expressing her feelings could shatter it. So they remained careful, unspoken emotions simmering just below the surface. The turning point came unexpectedly. Armand had a stressful day at work, with challenges that left him tense and anxious. Sarah noticed immediately. She prepared his favorite tea and placed it on the table without saying a word. Armand, exhausted and frustrated, sank into the couch and accepted it quietly. He looked at her, truly looked at her, felt a wave of gratitude mixed with something stronger, something he couldn't yet name. "I don't know what I'd do without you," said quietly, almost to himself. Sarah's eyes softened and she gave a gentle smile. "You don't have to think about that. I'm here, and that's enough." The words were simple, but the tone carried a depth of meaning. Armand felt his heart tighten. He wanted to say more, to tell her how important she had become, but the words caught in his throat. Fear, caution, and a strange vulnerability held him back. Sarah sensed it, yet chose not to press. Instead, she sat quietly beside him, offering comfort through presence rather than speech. Days turned into weeks, and these unspoken truths continued to grow. Both Armand and Sarah felt the subtle pull of emotional intimacy, the desire to be acknowledged and understood, the longing for connection that went beyond routine or practicality. Every shared glance, every casual touch, every smile became significant. They found themselves noticing the small details of each other's lives, the way Sarah's eyes lit up when she laughed, the way Armin's shoulders relaxed when he felt comfortable, the quiet gestures that communicated care without words. Yet the tension was not unpleasant. It was a gentle, almost sweet strain that made life more vivid. Each moment spent together carried weight, but in a comforting way. Armand began to realize that his life, once orderly and solitary, had gained color and depth through Sarah's presence. He felt emotions he had long suppressed: affection, concern, and even a quiet admiration for the woman who had become his companion. Confidant and anchor, Sarah experienced similar realizations. She understood that what she felt for Armand went beyond friendship or simple companionship. There was a desire for closeness, for shared experiences, and for emotional connection that she hadn't anticipated when she first moved in. Yet she also knew that expressing these feelings carried risk. What if he didn't feel the same? If their bond, fragile and precious, was disrupted by words spoken too soon? So she waited, choosing subtlety over declaration, presence over confrontation. Small incidents highlighted the growing intimacy. One afternoon, Armand noticed Sarah shivering slightly while reading by the window. Without thinking, he went to fetch a warm blanket and gently draped it over her shoulders. She looked up at him, a quiet smile spreading across her face. The gesture spoke more than words ever could. In that moment, both felt a silent acknowledgement of care, a recognition that the other mattered in ways they hadn't allowed themselves to admit. There were other moments. Two shared laughter over minor mishaps, gentle teasing during meal preparations, and quiet conversations late into the evening. Each interaction deepened the bond between them, creating an unspoken understanding that their lives had become intertwined in subtle but profound ways. Emotional intimacy had begun to take root, growing steadily through ordinary, everyday experiences. Despite the closeness, both remained aware of the fragile balance. Armin continued to guard his emotions, unwilling to make the first move or disrupt the calm structure of their shared life. Sarah, equally cautious, maintained her gentle attentiveness without pushing boundaries. They were both learning that intimacy could exist quietly, without declarations or dramatic gestures. It could grow in the spaces between words, in the pauses, in the shared silences, and in the subtle ways they cared for each other. Even mundane activities became meaningful. Doing laundry, tidying the apartment, or preparing meals were no longer solitary chores. They were moments of shared effort, understanding, and connection. Armand found himself noticing the way Sarah approached tasks with care and focus. Sarah observed the small, thoughtful gestures he made to ensure her comfort. These ordinary acts became symbols of the growing emotional bond between them, silent affirmations of their mutual care. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Armin felt the weight of the unspoken between them. He realized that living together had changed him, softened him, and opened him to feelings he had long avoided. He wanted to speak, to acknowledge the growing closeness, but fear and uncertainty held him back. Sarah, sensing his inner struggle, reached out and gently touched his hand. The contact was fleeting, yet it carried a message of understanding and reassurance. It was enough to communicate what words could not, and in that simple gesture, their hearts acknowledged a connection deeper than either had expected. The days that followed continued to weave their lives together. Every glance, smile, and shared silence became a thread in the fabric of their growing emotional intimacy. Both Armin and Sarah began to realize that the bond they had formed was no longer merely companionship, was something more profound, meaningful, and quietly transformative. They had become each other's confidants, support, and emotional anchors. By now, both were acutely aware of the unspoken truth. Living together had brought them closer than they had ever anticipated. The emotional intimacy they shared was undeniable, yet neither had fully voiced it. Each day, every shared moment, and every subtle gesture reinforced the bond, creating a sense of connection that was both comforting and exhilarating. It was a delicate, fragile, but undeniable truth that existed between them, waiting for the right time to be spoken aloud. And so, life continued in this quiet, delicate balance. Armand and Sarah navigated the days with care, patience, and attentiveness. Aware of the emotional closeness that had grown between them, they cherished the unspoken, yet unmistakable bond that had formed a bond built on mutual respect, shared routines, small acts of care, and a growing recognition that their lives had become intertwined in ways neither had planned, but both had come to value deeply. In this ordinary, everyday intimacy, Armand and Sarah discovered that connection could grow in subtle, quiet ways. It didn't require words, declarations, or dramatic moments. It lived in the gestures, smiles, silences, and attentiveness that made each day feel richer, fuller, and more meaningful, and in that unspoken truth between them. They found a bond stronger than either had imagined, a bond that was slowly but surely shaping the course of their shared life. The days had grown warmer, not because of the weather outside, but because of the quiet closeness that had settled between Armand and Sarah. Living together had transformed them both in ways they could no longer ignore. What had begun as a practical arrangement, a man needing companionship and a woman needing a place to stay, had quietly evolved into something deeper. The emotional bond between them had grown steadily, subtly, and irrevocably, till it became impossible to pretend that it didn't exist. Armand noticed the shift in himself more clearly than ever. He realized that he had stopped thinking of Sarah as just a companion. She had become essential to his daily life, his routines, and his happiness. Her laughter made him smile more easily. Her presence calmed the tension he often carried from work. He found himself looking forward to moments with her, the quiet mornings, the shared meals, and even the ordinary evenings spent together. Each of these moments had grown more meaningful over time, and he could no longer deny the feelings he had been carefully hiding. Even from himself, Sarah too was aware of the change. She could feel the depth of their connection in small gestures, the way Armand noticed her needs without being asked, the gentle concern in his voice when he asked about her day, the small ways he went out of his way to make her comfortable. She realized that what had started as mutual convenience had transformed into something more significant and emotional intimacy that was stronger than either of them had anticipated. The tension that had quietly existed between them for weeks was now impossible to ignore. Every glance carried meaning, every touch lingered longer than it needed to, and every shared silence was filled with unspoken words. The bond between them had grown too strong to remain unacknowledged, yet fear of disrupting their lives kept them from speaking openly. Armand feared admitting his feelings might ruin the comfort they had built, while Sarah worried that expressing herself too soon could change the delicate balance of their relationship. One evening, after a long day, Armand returned home feeling unusually restless. He had been thinking about Sarah all day, her laughter, her quiet attentiveness, and the way she had become a source of comfort he hadn't realized he needed. He found her sitting in the living room, reading, the soft light of the lamp casting a warm glow across her face. For a moment, he simply watched her, appreciating her presence. Feeling a surge of affection he could no longer contain, Sarah looked up and caught his gaze. There was a moment of hesitation, a pause where the unspoken hung between them. Then, slowly, Armand spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Sarah, I don't know how to say this, but you've become very important to me." Sarah's eyes softened and she smiled gently. She had been feeling the same way. Hearing him admit it brought a sense of relief and warmth she hadn't realized she was waiting for. "Armand," she replied softly, "I feel the same. I've felt this for a while, but I didn't want to risk our friendship, our comfort. I didn't know if it was the right time to say it." The words hung in the air, tender and sincere. In that moment, the emotional tension that had existed for so long began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet joy and relief. They realized that their connection built over months of shared routines, laughter, quiet evenings, and small acts of care was real, meaningful, and mutual. From that evening on, life in the apartment took on a new dimension. The comfort and companionship that had defined their relationship remained, but now it was complemented by the warmth of acknowledged feelings. Every shared meal, every conversation, and every quiet moment carried an added layer of intimacy. The apartment, which had once been a space of simple living, had become a home in the truest sense, a place where their hearts felt safe, understood, and connected. Armin found himself expressing his feelings in small, thoughtful ways. He would leave little notes for Sarah, reminding her to rest or to enjoy a warm cup of tea. He would prepare her favorite meals without being asked, and would notice the smallest things that made her happy. Each act was an extension of his care, a way to communicate the depth of his feelings beyond words. Sarah responded with equal attentiveness. She began to anticipate Armin's needs, offering comfort during stressful days, creating moments of laughter when tension built up, and quietly supporting him in ways that spoke volumes. Their relationship was no longer about mere companionship. It was a partnership built on trust, care, and emotional understanding. Even the simplest routines became meaningful rituals. Morning coffee shared at the kitchen table was no longer just a way to start the day, was a time to connect, to enjoy each other's company, and to reaffirm the bond they had formed. Evening walks became a cherished opportunity to speak freely, to share thoughts, and to simply enjoy the comfort of presence. The ordinary had become extraordinary because it was shared with someone who mattered deeply. Armin and Sarah also discovered the joy of supporting each other in personal growth. Armin, who had been reserved and cautious, found himself opening up more easily, learning to express his feelings and embracing vulnerability. Sarah, who had once been careful about attachments, learned to trust, to rely on someone else, and to accept care and affection with grace. Together, they created a balance, giving and receiving, supporting and nurturing, learning and growing in tandem. There were moments of lightheartedness, too. They laughed together over small mishaps in the kitchen, teased each other playfully during chores, and enjoyed quiet movie nights that became a ritual of comfort. These moments, while ordinary, carried a profound significance. They were proof that emotional intimacy could be simple, steady, and enduring. The transformation was not sudden. It was gradual and organic. Living together had created a foundation of trust, respect, and mutual care, and acknowledging their feelings built upon it naturally. What had begun as practical companionship had evolved into a relationship defined by understanding, emotional closeness, and a deep sense of belonging. One quiet evening, as they sat side by side on the couch, Armin reached out and held Sarah's hand. The gesture was simple, unhurried, and full of meaning. "I'm glad we took this journey together," he said softly. "I didn't expect this when we first started living together, but I wouldn't change a thing." Sarah squeezed his hand gently. "Neither would I," she replied. "I didn't know how much I needed someone like you in my life. Living together, it changed everything in the best way possible." In that moment, they understood that the journey they had taken, the ordinary days, the shared routines, the small gestures of care, was what had made their bond so strong. It wasn't built on dramatic events or sudden declarations. It was built on trust, patience, and the quiet intimacy that grows when two people live life together with awareness, empathy, and attention to each other's needs. From then on, life in the apartment was different, yet familiar. The routines remained, but they were now filled with warmth and affection. Each day carried small reminders of their closeness, a shared smile, a thoughtful gesture, a quiet conversation. Their bond had matured, evolving from companionship into something deeper, something meaningful, and entirely real. Armin and Sarah also began to envision the future together, not with pressure or expectation, but with a sense of shared purpose. They talked about plans, small dreams, and aspirations, always including each other in the picture. The emotional intimacy they had developed gave them confidence and courage, knowing that they could face life's challenges together in the quiet of their shared home. They learned that love and connection often grow in subtle ways. It doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes it appears quietly through the consistency of care, the attention to small details, and the willingness to be present for each other. Living together had revealed the depth of their feelings, allowing them to embrace honesty, vulnerability, and genuine affection. By the time the season changed outside their windows, Armin and Sarah had fully embraced the bond that had grown between them. They no longer questioned their connection or hesitated to express care. Every interaction was infused with warmth, respect, and understanding. Living together had not only brought them closer, but it taught them the true meaning of companionship, emotional intimacy, and shared life. And so, what had started as a simple arrangement too, people sharing space for convenience, had transformed into a meaningful relationship, one built on trust, care, understanding, and love. They had discovered that intimacy could grow quietly, patiently, and organically, and that the ordinary moments of life, when shared with someone who truly matters, could become extraordinary. In the end, Armand and Sarah realized that living together had been the beginning of something far greater than either had anticipated. It was a journey of trust, patience, and subtle emotional growth, culminating in a bond that was deep, real, and enduring. Their story was not defined by dramatic events, but by the quiet, meaningful moments of everyday life, the true markers of intimacy, understanding, and shared humanity.